Wallingford Presbyterian Church, a brief history compiled by Roger Demas. The early settlers who farmed the rolling terrain of Nether Providence Township and those who came later to build and work in the mills along its creeks worshiped at Middletown Presbyterian Church, at Union Methodist Church on Brookhaven Road, and later at the Presbyterian Church in Media.
But travel to these churches was difficult, and as the population of the little settlements throughout the township increased, and the building of the Pennsylvania Railroad brought more people from Philadelphia to this area, little Sunday schools were organized in the homes of devoted Christians.
One of these Sunday schools was begun in 1885 in the home of William Eves, a farmhouse across Providence Road from the site of the present Wallingford Elementary School. By 1887, this group had grown until it had to move to the Briggsville School, a building which was later converted to a dwelling and still stands at the corner of Shepherd's Lane and Providence Road.
The faith which had inspired these little Sunday schools was encouraged when Mrs. Matilda Turner deeded an acre of her property at the corner of Avondale Road and the road to Lewis's Mills to Messrs. James Spear, J. Bell Austin, and David B. Paul, trustees for the building of a chapel. Following their leadership, the cornerstone for the Wallingford Chapel was laid on June 21, 1888, with Sunday school and church services being held in it upon its completion. It seated about 100, and the curtain across the chancel arch separated the church from a Sunday school.
Probably everyone sat up on winter Sundays for the corner fireplaces in the common chimney heated both rooms.
Wallingford Presbyterian Church was organized on September 21st, 1891 with 32 charter members. Benjamin T. Jones became stated supply minister, meaning he acted as pastor but was not formally installed. Pastor Jones passed away in 1893. In 1894, the Reverend Robert M. Labrie became our first official minister, serving until 1899.
In 1894, Christian Endeavor youth groups began. In 1898, Women's Missionary Society is started.
In 1899, our second minister, the Reverend Edmund W. Fitzsimmons, was installed, and he served until 1908. The following year, the Reverend Edward L. Davies was installed as our third minister, serving until 1910. In 1911, the Reverend Edwin E. Riley was installed as our fourth minister and served until 1931. In 1912, the A Manse was built on land donated by Louise Spear.
In 1929, the church sanctuary was extended by one more window, and the social hall and basement classrooms were added to the original chapel.
The addition of a pipe organ made the chancel look very different. In 1931, the Reverend Edwin R. Rhine was installed as the fifth minister after the death of Reverend Riley. He served as pastor until 1943. In 1943, the Reverend Dr. John B. Rowland was installed as our sixth minister, serving the church until he passed away in March of 1979.
With the end of World War II, the troops came home and there was a need for reasonable price housing. Some of the larger properties in the area were sold off and subdivided. With that came an increase in population of Nether Providence Township. Many of the new programs were initiated at WPC as the congregation grew.
In 1946, Boy Scout Troop 277 was organized.
Between 1953 and 1954, the kitchen, reception room, and original church office, which is now the library, were added on the first floor, and 3 more Sunday school rooms were constructed in the basement. The area under the church was excavated to provide 6 classrooms for the junior high department. This area is now known as the youth room and was referred to as the Pine Room for the next 50 years because of the knotty pine paneling that was installed. The chancel at the front of the sanctuary was opened up, the pipe organ was refurbished and enlarged and repositioned, and the rose window was installed.
The Monday Evening Guild was started in the 1940s. During that time, the Women's Missionary Society became Presbyterian Women, now known as Women of Wallingford, or WOW. Initially, there were 6 circles that met monthly and had a Bible lesson. The Bible study leaders from each circle would meet together with Pastor Rowland to be trained for the lessons.
Christian Endeavor became the Vesper Forum that was composed of young adults who met on Sunday night to read and discuss books or talk about current topics. The group took on a program called Carols Are on the Board. They would select a country and put on a program where they would highlight the food, culture, and music of that nation.
At this time, garden clubs met at the church and would decorate the outside doors at Christmas time. The League of Women Voters, Boy Scouts, and Girl Scouts also met at the church. Co-op playgroup was started by Helen Rowland and later grew into the Wallingford Co-op Nursery School. Primary, junior, junior high, and adult choirs formed for the first time.
By 1970, the church had grown even more, and thus had another building campaign to add the narthex, 3 offices, and room number 1 on the first floor, the choir room, nursery, and classrooms in the basement. This is the architect's vision of the additions.
The scenes in the stained glass windows were chosen by Dr. Rowland, with the exception of the prayer window and the children's window. The rose window was dedicated on November 6, 1955. The Great Commission window was dedicated on September 27, 1970. The Nativity window was dedicated on December 21, 1975. The Resurrection window was dedicated on May 23, 1976.
Dr. Rowland had to be convinced in the beginning as to whether the church needed a church secretary. His initial response was, well, why? What would she do? Those who served as administrative assistant during the early years at our church include Betty Lou Mall, Kay Wicker, Ruth Compton, and Kit Daimler.
Wallingford Presbyterian Church has had many assistant and associate pastors over the years. In the mid-20th century, these included Robert Saunders, 1959 to 1961, Daniel Bevington, 1961 to 1965, Robert Hallman, 1966 to 1972, Vernon Grambling, 1973 to 1975, and George Portis, 1975 to 1980.
In 1980, the Reverend Dr. David R. Drain was installed as our 7th minister, serving the church until the turn of the new century in 2000. The stained glass window installations were completed in the sanctuary with the prayer window designed by Pastor Drain with the assistance of Pastor Melanie Hammond Clark and Dr. Eleanor Logan. They used a similar theme as the existing windows. The preaching window was dedicated on January 20th, 1980. Christ's Childhood and Preparation window was dedicated on May 17th, 1981. The Transfiguration window was dedicated on May 24th, 1987. The Teaching window was dedicated on September 27th, 1987. The Prayer window was dedicated on May 24th, 1988. And the Healing window was dedicated on April 29th, 1989.
This was a time of great spiritual growth as the boards were increased in number and became very active in the life of the church. Many programs were initiated, including Proof, or Probing Responsibly Our Own Faith, Kerygma, Discipleship, and Space for God. There were many retreats, some specifically for the elders or women, others, including silent and general retreats for all. The youth programs grew, and there were middle school and senior high fellowships. The senior high fellowship went on mission trips to Clairvaux Farm outside of Elkton, Maryland, Ireland, Sumter, South Carolina, Boston, Massachusetts, and Mexico.
The Minister in Training Program, MIT for short, was instituted through cooperation with Princeton Theological Seminary around the same time. We were blessed to have the following MITs at WPC in the 80s and 90s. Hal Murray and Don Wassinger from 1980 to 1981. George Wilcox and Julie Mustonen from 1981 to 1982. Chris Danielson and Joanne Scott from 1982 to 1983. Martha Bowman and Robert Finley from 1983 to 1984. Lisa Ross and Ross Slaughter from 1984 to 1985, and Carrie Jones and Greg Love from 1985 to 1986. Emily Duncan and Jerry Davis from 1986 to 1987, Tim Thomas and Janet Parker from 1987 to 1988, Kristen Will and Trace Haythorne from 1988 to 1989, and Dana Ferguson and Christopher Brundage from 1989 to 1990. Trace Haythorne again from 1990 to 1991. Cynthia Ritter Park and Thomas Hickok from 1991 to 1992. David Lovelace from 1992 to 93, and Jean Thomas from 1993 to 1994.
Associate pastors in the 1980s and 90s included Michael K. Gillespie from 1981 to 1983, Melanie Hammond Clark from 1984 to 1991, Jeffrey Conway from 1988 to 1996, Ruth Ellen Strathton from 1992 to 1993, and Jean Thomas from Jean Thomas from 1997 to 2001.
In 2002, the Reverend Susan K. Hawkinson was installed as our 8th minister, who served the church until 2011. The sanctuary was remodeled shortly after her arrival. In 2005, the old pipe organ was removed to make way for a new electronic organ, and the chancel was extended further into the sanctuary.
Between the departure of Pastor Drain and the arrival of Pastor Hawkinson, Ronald T. Allen served as interim from 2000 to 2002. Associate pastors who have served since the year 2000 include Jonathan F. Smoot, who served as interim from 2001 to 2004, Roger M. Rice, who served as associate pastor from 2005 to 2007, Robert D. Ross, who served from 2007 to 2017, and Pastor Taylor Cornelius, who has been our associate pastor since 2017. The Reverend Paul Raybergen served as interim senior pastor between Pastor Hawkinson's departure and Pastor Francois' arrival. In 2013, the Reverend Francois Lacroix was installed as our 9th minister and continues to serve our church community.
Amen.